You are about to observe a minor incident and will be asked to report what you have observed. You will be able to see, but not to hear what is going on. Are you ready? Observe. Paul Pipp observes the world around him. At the same time, he interprets and makes assumptions about what he observes. For example, raised in one culture with one set of experiences, he might assume that this animal is a sacred object. Raised in another culture, he might assume that the animal is an edible object. Based upon these assumptions, he might conclude either, 1, that the animal is to be worshipped, or 2, that the animal is to be slaughtered for eating. We can make assumptions of our own about which conclusion Paul is likely to reach, because he is now sales manager for a meat packing concern. In relating to people, Paul follows the same three-step process. He observes, he interprets and makes assumptions, and he reaches conclusions. For a long time, Paul has felt dissatisfied with salesman Frank Riley. Now he reinforces the decision to let him go. In the first step, Paul reappraises the objective data. He observes that Riley's sales figures have again fallen short of expectations. He also observes Riley's habitual facial expression, the compressed eyebrows, the downward curve of the mouth. So far, all observation, all facts. In the second part of the process, Paul plugs these data into his own memory experience system.
He's frowning again, always scowling. That always makes me uncomfortable, and I'm sure it has the same effect on others. I know for a fact that people don't like to buy goods from someone with an unpleasant personality.
So thirdly, he concludes that Riley cannot be a productive salesman, and he is justified in firing him.
I'm sorry things haven't worked out, Riley.
What do you mean, not step?
In his defense, Riley may return Paul to step 1 again by offering additional data.
Into consideration. I think one of the main reasons our sales have dropped off is because Johnson House Packers are making a big drive in my marketing area. Now, they're undercutting us in prices. Naturally, some of my customers are taking advantage of the better deals. But this'll change.
Paul believes he is considering these possible facts objectively. But again, he goes to the second step, assumption and interpretation.
Oh, sure, I expected him to come up with some excuse. And the nasty way he said that. He's implying that I don't understand pricing, that the competition is putting something over on me.
And Paul reaches his conclusion.
Customers
Look,
feel...
Riley, you're trying to blame me for your failure.
I never said anything about you.
You don't have to say it. You implied it. I'm sorry, Riley. You just don't fit the image we want in our salesman.
A week later, Paul has a surprising phone conversation.
But you've always been one of our preferred customers. I don't understand.
Why did you fellas fire Frank Riley?
Riley? Well, he just wasn't getting the job done.
I don't like the way you treat him. In my book, Riley was the best meat salesman in the business. Not like that smiling, glad handler you sent here today. Riley worried about my problems. I can tell by looking at him that he took my business seriously.
The same Riley, but different interpretations and assumptions, different conclusions. We're beginning to see that Paul Pipp, like each of us, lives in a world of assumptions. Is that bad? No, not at all. It's absolutely necessary. Looked at objectively, without assumptions, this is only a red sign with white lettering. But Paul observes that the letters spell the word stop and assumes that the sign was placed where it is for a purpose. He concludes that he is supposed to stop his car. These assumptions, however unconsciously made, are necessary if Paul is to reach the desired conclusion. Now let's change the circumstances. Suppose he is jogging and encounters the sign in the middle of a field. Objectively, it's the same sign, but to maintain the same assumptions and reach the same conclusion would be foolish. Many assumptions are shared by members of a society. When Paul says,
Fill it up.
he and the station attendant share an assumption about what that means. Now, suppose the attendant was a literal-minded person, incapable of making assumptions. Every customer might have to go through a conversation something like this.
Fill it up.
Fill what up?
Fill up my gasoline tank.
What do you want me to fill it up with?
Eggnog. What do you think?
We don't have eggnog.
Please, just fill up my gasoline tank with regular 91-octane gasoline from that pump over there.
If I do, you'll have to pay for it.
I had assumed that was understood.
Without the ability to make assumptions, it would take endless time to do the simplest things. On the other hand, because our assumptive worlds differ, reaction to identical data may vary widely, as when Mrs. Pip and Mrs. Ronson visit the same medical office. Mrs. Ronson is the first to meet the new, young doctor.
You seem awfully young for a doctor.
I suppose so.
I don't suppose you've had much experience with my type of ailment.
I've seen a number of cases.
When you were an intern or just learning?
In some cases.
You know, I really think I would rather see the older doctor.
Next, Mrs. Pip, with the same initial observation.
You're very young for a doctor.
So it seems.
I suppose they give doctors better training these days than they used to.
In some cases.
I imagine you know all the latest techniques and everything.
I think so.
I hope you're going to be my regular doctor.
Going from observation to interpretation to conclusion may be an active process.
Now, I mustn't think badly of him just because he has a beard. It's just a fashion. My own nephew has whiskers, and he's a nice boy. So I'll just speak to that young man as though he were perfectly normal.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Mrs. Pip.
Or the jump from observation to conclusion may be almost spontaneous.
How are things in the drug culture?
Our assumptions are often a distortion or simplification of the objective data. Sometimes the distortion leads to wrong conclusions, as when Paul finds a mistake in some figures.
This is a typical Bill Brusher mistake. This time I'll face him with it. These bid sheets are wrong. We'd lose money. Look, what are you trying to do? Put us out of business?
I've never seen these before.
Well, I thought you made out all these bid sheets.
No, and I don't work at putting us out of business either.
At other times, Paul's inner process results in a correct conclusion.
Well, I just feel like I'm pulling more than my share of the load. I think the company expects too much of me.
She's not the type to complain about her workload. It's more likely a matter of pride. I can guess what's really bugging her. Gene, you and Bill Brusher do the same kind of work. Are you under the impression we pay him more?
Don't you?
No. You're at exactly the same salary level he is.
Oh. Well, I guess if he's not complaining, then I ought to be able to carry my share of the load.
How effective is Paul Pip in communicating with other people? It depends to some extent upon his ability to distinguish between objective observation and subjective interpretation. Let's see.
Tell me this. Why aren't we receiving more orders on the new product?
Because we're dealing with people who have no imagination. They don't want to try anything new. They're only interested in products that sell without any effort on their part.
Well, the survey we made indicates they're misinformed about the product. I mean, we're trying to sell it as a staple, but most of our customers on the survey classified it as a luxury item.
The man gave Paul subjective interpretation, which could lead him astray. The woman offered somewhat more objective data, which might suggest corrective action. But there remains the third factor of Paul's own inner processes.
Surveys are bunk. I never trust surveys. I believe in gut reaction. Bill's probably right. They don't want to try anything new.
If Paul Pip were more aware of the process in himself and in others, he could be more effective in coping with it. What about the rest of us? When we're asked to report what we have observed, do we do it? Or do we add interpretations, assumptions, and fantasies? Judge for yourself. Weekdays, Bill Brusher is a well-dressed young executive. But on Saturdays, he skips shaving, puts on old clothes, and works on his antique car. Needing a certain sized bolt, he dashes off to an auto parts store.
I don't have my wallet. I left it at home. I'll just have to come on back.
Only to discover he has left his wallet at home. Luckily, Bill's wife is downtown shopping, and he sees her.
Hey, sweetheart.
Don't put your hand on my sweater, honey. You're greasy.
I'm sorry. I came downtown to buy a bolt for the car, and I left my wallet. Do you have $10?
Yes. I hope nobody sees you down here dressed like that.
Nobody cares. Don't spend all my check.
I'll try not to.
If you figured all this out or tried to, you were guessing and interpreting rather than just observing, as requested. How would the report you wrote earlier stand up as testimony to what you actually saw? Looking at what you wrote, can you now distinguish observation from interpretation, from conclusion?